Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 48th webinar on the Secret Doctrine, which, by the way, marks the end of our 4th year together. So thank you all for making this possible. And a special thanks to those of you who have been here since the beginning. So we enter our 5th year next time. Seems like I should issue certificates of some sort. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation webinar, then webinar series in progress. You can see the 4 that are in progress here now at this point. All episodes of this and the Secret Teaching series are also now available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald Secret Doctrine or Secret Teachings. Okay. This month, as we continue in Volume 3 of Old Diary Leaves, Colonel Olcott visits the Maharaja of Kashmir. And these Maharajas were really kings of an entire region of India in the 19th century, as you can see here by the photos. Okay, could we get a reader for this, please?
Lynn, will you start us off, please? I'm sorry, did you say me, Lynn? Yes, Lynn. Would you start us off, please? Sorry. Reception by the Maharaja of Kashmir. The next morning at 10:30, a minister of the Durbar brought me word that His Highness begged the honor of my presence at the palace. In our compound stood 2 elephants and 4 fine saddle horses, richly caparisoned with housings and saddle covers of cashmere shawl work, and silver-mounted bridles and stirrups awaiting my pleasure, with a guard of honor of armed sepoys. I chose the elephants, so we mounted the sagacious kneeling beasts and went on our way, the sepoys in front to clear the road. We threaded the narrow streets of Jammu, driving all wayfarers to the nearest shelters, and at last reached the palace. There were the usual enclosing walls with massive gates, the outer compound with horses, elephants, camels, oxen, donkeys, heavy wains, light vehicles, ekas, piles of straw, bags of grain, building materials, etc. All in confusion, armed sentries pacing their beats and soldiers in untidy undress, lounging about. Then came an inner court and the palace gateway, through which we passed, mounted a wide staircase, and found ourselves in the presence chamber. The Maharajas came soon and received me with an air of kindness and stately courtesy that showed beyond doubt that I was welcome. His first expression was to Pandit Gopinath, my interpreter, was one of pleasure to see me in his national costume.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, reader for the next part.
Yvonne, would you read that for us, please?
Yes. A carpet and black bolster had been spread for him on a slightly raised platform, before which we were to sit on the carpeted floor. But he dragged the bolster from there, placed it on the floor, motioned me to sit beside him, and called me his elder brother. He was a man of noble presence, with an intellectual face and the splendid eyes of the Hindu, which by turns can be full of pathos, blaze with anger, or penetrating with intelligent interest. His personality fitted the kingly office perfectly, which is more than can be said of some other sovereigns whom I have seen, and whom looked rather like cooks or grooms than high-born rulers of men. I found him to be a thoughtful pedantant, well acquainted with philosophical systems. He fully believed in the existence of living Mahatmas and trusted in them to do for India all that her karma made possible, but no more. He gently broached the subject of his own ill health said he knew of my cures and of the recent prohibition to continue the practice, but asked if I would not at least relieve the acute pain he was then suffering from. I consented, of course, and on his removing his turban, did what I could for him with mesmeric healing passes. He submitted to my manipulations with perfect docility, which I must confess gave me a peculiar sensation, for Americans are not in the habit of handling sovereigns like common men, however they may theoretically regard them as their equals.
Thank you. And next, please.
Karen, would you read that for us, please?
I had the pleasure of removing His Highness's pain, and when the audience closed, he begged me to visit him twice a day during my stay, that we might talk of the high religious themes which equally interested us. The same evening, when I was sitting in our bungalow, I saw a queer procession of men enter from the veranda. First came a court official, attended by a servant carrying a pair of scales, and another with some heavy bag on his shoulder, which was gravely laid at my feet. Then followed a string of 21 other dark-faced, turbaned servants, each bearing on his head a flat basket of fruit or sweets, which were piled on each other on the table, counted by the court officer, and the men dismissed. While I was wondering what all this could mean, Gopinath was told that His Highness received me as a guest of the first class, and as such, 21 baskets were sent me. There were guests of 3 classes, of which the second received 14 baskets, the third 7 baskets. Below that, people did not count. He then opened the gunny bag, poured the contents, silver coins, into the scales, weighed them, and took my receipt for, what does that mean?
That's rupees.
Rupees.
400 rupees.
500 rupees. This, he explained, was table money. Though why he should give me that when our every possible and impossible wish was gratified, I could not imagine. However, it was the custom of the court of Kashmir, and His Highness's honor was involved in doing things as they had always been done from ancient times by Indian kings.
Thank you, Karen. Okay. This month, we continue with the subject of karma, the Four Maharajas pictured here, and the Lupika lords. We finished our last session with this statement: the seraphim are the fiery serpents of heaven, which we find in a passage describing Mount Meru as, quote, the exalted mass of glory, the venerable haunt of gods and heavenly choristers, not to be reached by sinful men, because guarded by serpents. These serpents are called the Avengers and the Winged Wheels. So that's where we stopped last time. HPB tells us that the cherubim and seraphim, along with the winged globes and fiery wheels, are all allegorical descriptions of the Four Maharajas and their agents. Could we get a reader for the first half of the long paragraph on the next page of the Secret Doctrine?
Harry, would you read that for us, please?
Sure. There, the seraphim's mission and character being explained, let us see what the Christian Bible interpreters say of the cherubim. The word signifies in Hebrew fullness of knowledge. These angels are so called from their exquisite knowledge, and were therefore used for the punishment of men who affected divine knowledge, interpreted by Cruden in his concordance from Genesis 3:24. Very well, and vague as the information is, it shows that the cherub placed at the gate of the Garden of Eden after the fall, suggested to the venerable interpreters the idea of punishment connected with forbidden science or divine knowledge, one that generally leads to another fall, that of the gods or God in man's estimation. But as the good old Cruden knew naught of karma, he may be forgiven.
Okay, thoughts or questions about this passage? So, according to traditional Christianity, cherubim were used for the punishment of men. A little different than the visual image that comes up when we think of chubby little cherubim, right? Concordances in general, especially 19th century concordances, tend to emphasize the idea of a punishing God. Actually, I looked up a current concordance, and it was much more positive than what's described here. We have a much more insightful definition of cherubim from the Royal Masonic Cyclopedia. Could we get a reader? I didn't transcribe this because of all the Hebrew, which my computer refused to recognize, so I did just do a copy-paste of this. So my apologies if it's a little tricky to read, but somebody, I'm sure, if somebody
Greg.
actually knows Hebrew, that's great. Otherwise,
Well, I have Greg up. Greg, would you read that for us, please?
Yeah. Cherubim, the second order of the angelic hierarchy, succeeding the seraphim. In Hebrew, the singular form of, I don't know what it is, but the description is nowhere found. According to Aben Ezra, the word means all sorts of images in general. Several rabbis assert that the form was that of a child, considering as a servile letter. They read Sherbia, which in Chaldea means like an infant. From this idea have arisen the little winged heads used in religious paintings. The etymology of the word is, however, doubtful. In Syriac, cherubim means strong, powerful, perhaps an allusion to the ox used in agriculture. The root, meaning laborer, Rosenmüller considers that Moses found the figure of the cherub in the sanctuaries of ancient Egypt, where the image of the lion symbolized strength and majesty, the bull, constancy, firmness, and force, the man corresponding with humanity and gentleness. And it's, I don't understand the script.
don't worry, you can just skip any foreign words. That's fine.
Yeah, and the eagle with the energy and sublimity of the divine nature. Among the seven Ophite spirits, the first, the lion, corresponded with Michael, the second, the bull, with Uriel, the third, the dragon, with Raphael, the fourth, the eagle, with Gabriel, the fifth was a bear, corresponding with Thaltabaoth, the sixth, according to Celsus, had the form of a dog and was named Eratoath, and the seventh, according to Origen, had the shape of an ass and was called Onad or Thartaroth. The cherubim have also been compared to the Eupagi or griffins of the Persians, guardians of the mountain of gold. But the word cherub or cherub has a great affinity with Shebub, a celebrated spirit in the Persian mythology who is represented with wings and a sword in his hand. The first mention of cherubim is in Genesis 3:24, where they are thus described. And as Moses must have been undoubtedly familiar with Persian, Assyrian, and Ninevite cosmology, it is there we may seek for the true origin of the term. If the discoveries of Mr. George Smith in Assyria prove anything more distinctly than anything else, it is that the mythology of Genesis was derived by the Jehovistic or Elohistic authors of the Jewish cosmogony from the libraries of the sovereigns of Nineveh, Babylon, and Warka or Erech. The cherubim also overshadowed the mercy seat or covering of the ark, and between them the Shekinah rested, and thence the Bothkol or voice of God issued. The fourth mystical animals played a great part in the Kabbalah, and the cherubim no doubt partook of their nature in the eyes of the ancient worshippers of God.
Well navigated. That's not an easy passage to read.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah. Any thoughts or questions about this excerpt? So, the provenance for Genesis can be traced back to Assyrian writings, and with it, the likely origins of cherubim in the images of sword-bearing, winged Davic beings like the one shown here. It's just another example of how both the Old and the New Testament have, sources for those writings can be found in more ancient writings, in tablets, engravings, etc. Next, in Theosophy, Eden represents a stage of unconscious divine union before the development of mind, as was experienced by the early subraces of the third root race. The gates of Eden were guarded by the cherubim because the plan for humankind at that time was to follow the involutionary path. And to do that, of course, you had to leave the Garden of Eden. As a result of the eating of the apple of knowledge given to Eve by the serpent, divine science thus became hidden, to be discovered once again in the next root race, or two root races later, on the path of return, the evolutionary path, where we will find these same apples described in the labors of Heracles as the golden apples of the Hesperides. That's the Gemini labor that they come up. Here, HPB describes humanity's descent into form, the quote, fall of the gods, which are our human monads. Can we get a reader for this passage from the second volume of the Secret Doctrine, which quotes the Zohar, starting with the caption, and please start with the caption at the bottom.
Martha, would you be able to read that for us, please?
Yes. The angel of the coats of skin by William Blake. And then the reading goes, finally, it is shown in every ancient scripture and cosmogony that man evolved primarily as a luminous incorporeal form, over which, like the molten brass round the clay model of the sculptor, the physical frame of his body was built by, through, and from the lower forms and types of animal terrestrial life. The soul and the form, when descending on earth, put on an earthly garment, says the Zohar. Quote, his protoplastic body was not formed of that matter of which our mortal frames are fashioned. When Adam dwelt in the Garden of Eden, he was clothed in the celestial garment, which is the garment of heavenly light, light of that light which was used in the Garden of Eden. Man, the heavenly Adam, was created by the 10 Sephiroth of the Jezreeric world, and by the common power they, the 7 powers of a still lower world, engendered the earthly Adam. First Samuel fell, and then deceiving man caused his fall also, unquote.
Okay, any thoughts?
Yeah.
Any thoughts or questions about this?
Well, if I understood it correctly, this is exactly what DK says, isn't it? That
Yeah, Theosophy, you could say in general, holds to this involutional path as descriptive of, the Eden and of Adam and Eve. But we have some.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And today, don't we take both paths? That is, the in the mantra of the disciple, and turning back, we save. So
that's interesting. It's the involutional path specifically refers to the grand arc of descent into form, into the form world, which for humankind took place up and into the Atlantean times. And then the evolutionary arc, beginning with the end subraces of the Atlantean times and the fifth root race of the Aryan race, makes possible the evolutionary path through the development of humankind. So especially in the third root race, we have an illustration of the evolutionary path where they actually, the great purpose of the early subraces was to come into denser form. And so much of the rest of the Secret Doctrine that we'll be studying over the next 50 years deals with that descent, right? The great problem of creating a coordinated physical existence for humankind, which had as he says here, a protoplastic body, right? Not yet formed of matter. So when you get to the fourth root subrace of the third root race, which is Lemurian race, then you have that shift from what was called the egg-born, which was a form of reproduction that had to do with etheric nature, into an actual, as we know it today, male-female procreating to create the human form. And that didn't actually happen until the late Lemurian. So all of that's involutionary, right? So it's description of two great arcs, right? And I'll make one other correction. It's Samael, and Samael is a Zohar description of Satan. But in both cases, they are not the red guy with horns that shows up on Halloween and rules over hell, as much as they are those who assisted humanity into this stage of their process. That's why she has a question mark after deceiving, which is a very biblical perspective.
Thank you for the correction, Francis. Is Samael equivalent to Lucifer?
Not directly, but you could say they belong to the same tribe in a sense. Lucifer is the light bearer, and so they have a different root in their name, but definitely the same purpose. Prometheus also belongs to this group. He doesn't have that negative connotation, but he stole fire from heaven and brought it to humankind, and that fire was the fire of mind. And then he was punished by Zeus, for doing that. So it's a little different mythology behind the same idea. This is it's a huge concept.
Sorry, Francis. Kerry has his hand raised. Joe, can you unmute him?
I just wanted to comment on the painting. I think the face is so full of compassion, as if to say, I'm sorry about this, you're going to have to suffer, but it's such a wonderful painting that.
Yeah, well, you're looking at one of the great master painters.
Absolutely.
In that, and I say that, you can look at that from two directions. He was masterful in his ability to paint, but I think my opinion was he was also a master who incarnated William Blake. And therefore gave us this kind of translated vision, some of this stuff is just so astonishing. I have a couple other examples coming up.
Am I seeing it wrongly? Has the angel got 6 toes?
You sure saw that right? Yeah. Wow. That's not a mistake. There's something in that. Thanks for pointing that out, Carrie. Maybe that's, you get into the 5th kingdom and you get an extra toe to help you navigate in those etheric realms. Interesting.
We have 2 more raised hands.
Okay. Next up. Yeah.
And who are they? Lynn, would you tell me who has their hand raised, please? Because it's
Robert?
Robert can speak. Robert, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, yeah. After many years of being confused between the involutionary path and the fall, I kind of came to the conclusion that there might be falls within the involutionary path. That, in fact, they are easy to think that it's the same thing, but within the involutionary path of the soul, there may be, like I said, falls that happened at certain points or transition, or anyway, it's just kind of speculation.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can have temporary falls, that is, in your process of becoming, where you revert and go into more materialistic lives. On the ultimate arc, you're actually doing recapitulation, where you're doing, work that needed to be done, and so you go back to do it. And then there is the Black Brotherhood or the Dark Brotherhood, which is their purpose is to aggrandize form and to hide spirit. And that's, you could say, the fallen counterpart to the progressive evolutionary arc. And so, we have both poles constantly in process. So yeah, that's a good point.
Like and during certain cycles, the Dark Lodge would have, let's say, more influence and cause this retardation or fall, where on other cycles that would, the opposite would be true. So anyway.
That's right. And if it wasn't for the fact that it's all ultimately spiralic, there would be, we couldn't escape that influence. But so there's concession, just in the lunar cycles, from as we wane from the full moon, it's considered a materialistic phase, right? And the same thing with the dark half and light half of the years. We are now past the equinox of the dark half of the year, more moving towards the solstice, and those two are energetically governing patterns that are like a fall and resurrection. That all mythology is full of this death and resurrection of the heroic figure, right? And it's metaphoric for the 2 cycles of the sun, the 2 solstices, you could say. Yeah. Anyone else? It's good stuff.
Carrie, did you have anything additional to add?
No.
Okay. Any other hands?
Not that I'm seeing.
Okay. Also, let's see. Hang on a sec. Let me see something about this. Oh, yeah. Also in the Secret Doctrine, 2nd volume, HPB tells us that, quote, in the Chaldean book of Numbers, Samael is the concealed, occult wisdom. So that goes along with what we were just talking about, right? The concealed by what? By the form aspect, right? The question mark here suggests that there was no deception, but rather an introduction into the realm of manas, and thus a guiding onto the involutional arc. Development of manas always results in the breaking of the link, the unconscious link with spirituality, in order to develop individuality and the conscious awareness, right? Okay, let's finish this paragraph.
Yvonne, would you read that for us, please?
Yet the allegory is suggestive. From Meru, the abode of the gods, to Eden, the distance is very small. And from the Hindu serpents to the Ophite cherubim, the third out of 7 of which was the dragon, the separation is still smaller. For both watch the entrance to the realm of secret knowledge. But Ezekiel plainly describes the 4 cosmic angels. I looked, and behold, a whirlwind, a cloud and fire enfolding it. Also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures. They had the likeness of a man, and every one had 4 faces and 4 wings, the face of a man, and the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. Man was here substituted for dragon. Compare the Ophite spirits. Now, as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel upon the earth with his 4 faces, as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. For the support of the living creature was in the wheel. Their appearance was like coals of fire, etc.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this passage? Okay. The symbolic distance between Eden and Meru is the distance between the 3rd and 5th root races, because Meru is the holy mountain, the axis mundi of the 5th root race, and Eden was that place from the 3rd in the 3rd root race, and consequently between the involutional and evolutional arcs, though both represent the primary source of the sacred governing beings, and both represent a kind of ring pass not, which guards the, quote, entrance to the realm of secret knowledge, a knowledge gained only through initiation on the return path. Gerald Massey traces the origin of the cherubim, serpent, and dragon in this quote from A Natural Genesis.
Francis, Greg has his hand up.
Go ahead. Yeah, Greg.
Greg,
I was
yeah, go ahead.
wondering. Yeah, I'm gonna say what I was gonna say. I was wondering, would there be a relationship between? I mean, when we think of like the Olympus of Roman and Greek mythology, is there a relationship to Meru as the Mount Olympus?
Absolutely.
But there is. Okay,
Yeah,
so
you could say it's
Meru,
the same thing. You know, Zeus lives on Olympus. The Avalokiteshvara lives in Meru. But guess what? It's the same place and it's the same god. Black Elk talked about Harney Peak as being the center of the world, which, you know, is American Indian. Fortunately, they've renamed it. Instead of Harney, it's now called Black Elk Peak, which I think is a marvelous change. But anyway, it's the same place. It's the same center. It's the local
metaphorical
example. Well, metaphor, but also literal. You know, if you were to, there is a quality to these places that links them all together, right? So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's, say, wait a minute, if you're in an exoteric frame of mind, you say, well, what is it? Is it Olympus or is it Meru? Yeah,
Right.
the answer
Or
is
even
yes.
Devil's Tower in Wyoming is representative and sacred to those people too. And that you're almost like, it's a Meru for them too. It's the Bear Mountain where the sky people would come and came and visited, I guess, or whatever.
Exactly. What's interesting is that so many of the American tribes, and then if you extend that, so many of the cultures of the world have this concept, right? Where there is a peak. It doesn't work, for the Navajo people to think about Meru, they need a local example, not to mention that when this faith was developed, there was no way, that they could relate to any place outside their area. So, yeah. Good stuff.
Cool. Well, that's great to hear that, because you could even associate it with like Mount Shasta, or you could associate it with just all over. And I wonder if there's some connection to Sanat Kumara and Shambhala.
Well, certainly there is, especially through Meru, because that's, the sort of theosophically recognized axis mundi of the world. And you could say that all other references to the central point are references to that, which is ultimately a reference to Shambhala. Indeed.
Cool. All right. Great. Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, now we'll move on to this quote. Gerald Massey's quote from Natural Genesis. Can we get a reader, please?
Karen, could you read that for us, please?
An exhaustive investigation shows that these figures of the serpent, dragon, or lizard are derived from one common type, which served as a foundation for them all. Griffin, hippogriff, harpy, or cherub are all explained by the Egyptian cherub, a primordial type or a model figure. My Original Country sings Taliesin is the region of cherubim, the fons et origo, and the place of response at the center of all.
Repose.
The place of repose, at the center of all. In the Naga scriptures of India, two griffins or gardua, like griffins, called kinnaras, are sometimes portrayed on each side of the Naga tree, corresponding to the two cherubim and the two griffins, or the two unicorns. The double dragon or griffin also supports the tree of the cross on the sculptured stones of Scotland. The tree, which was that of knowledge, was identified by the Druids with the Ogham pillar, and every science was considered to have emanated from this tree or pillar.
Thank you, Karen. So we have an example of the Ogham pillar here to the left, and they use these particular markings on them to record knowledge. Any thoughts about this? Okay.
Interesting.
Oops, somebody needs to mute. So
Greg can mute. Thank you, Greg.
You can mute these folks if you hear that. If you can identify it, go ahead and do that. Okay, in the rest of the paragraph, HPB quotes excerpts from Ezekiel's vision, which we read in full during our last session. The point HPB makes, and which Gerald Massey sets out to prove in his Natural Genesis, is that there is an ancient common origin to the tree of knowledge and to the cherubim who guard that tree that has been represented in different guises throughout the ancient world. Let's take a look at the footnote referencing the term Ophite spirits. Could we get a reader for this short passage?
I'll read this short one.
Good.
Man was here substituted for dragon. Compare the Ophite spirits. The angels recognized by the Roman Catholic Church who correspond to these faces were with the Ophites: dragon for Raphael, lion for Michael, bull or ox for Uriel, and eagle Gabriel. The four keep company with the four evangelists and preface the Gospels.
So all through this section, she's, you could say, putting straw in the mud between the ancient mythology and teachings, and showing the correspondences in the Gospels. Right. Any thoughts about this? Okay, Albert Pike relates this more complete list of the Ophite spirits, it's listed here in white, you can see it, to their starry and planetary sources. And, there are 7 shown here rather than 4. And Albert Pike gives their relationship to both planets and the stars. Could we get a reader for this, including, please, the description underneath the photo?
And Fred,
Carrie, would you-
oh, go ahead. Yeah, Carrie made a comment, so he can speak to that.
Yeah, Carrie, go ahead and then read for us.
Well, my comment was only that Taliesin was a Welsh bard.
Right.
It was mentioned 2 slides ago.
Thank you. Yeah, and I meant to point that out, that we took a look during way back. We were all younger then, on our section on the Druids, right? And Taliesin was, I think, I'm wanting to say 8th century, but it might have been 6th to 8th. So sometime after the ancient Druidic form had passed, but nonetheless in that tradition. Yes.
The mysterious catacombs of Qom el Shokafa in Alexandria were discovered a little more than 100 years ago, when a donkey disappeared into a hole in the earth. What was uncovered was a complex of 3-story underground catacombs. While the upper floor is pretty bare from design, the middle floor has a unique tomb that combines Egyptian, Greek, and Roman iconography.
Okay. And this relates to the subject of morals and dogma here.
With the Ophites, a section of the Gnostics, there were 7 inferior spirits, inferior to Yaldabaoth, the demiurgus or actual creator: Michael, Suriel, Raphael, Gabriel, Thautaboat, Eratoat, and Athaniel, the genii of the stars called the bull, the dog, the lion, the bear, the serpent, the eagle, and the ass that formerly figured in the constellation Cancer, and symbolized respectively by those animals as Ealdabaoth, Eo, Adonai, Eloi, Orai, and Astaphi, were the genii of Saturn, the moon, the sun, Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury. Morals and dogma.
Yes, thank you. So he's unique in having linked all these traditions together, so you can get further insight into, for instance, the nature of Saturn by tracing it, back to the biblical names and the animal qualities of the genies that are associated with each of these. Anyway.
And Anne Christus says the dragon is with the caduceus.
Right. Dragon, serpent, and snake are interchangeable terms, and they represent a particular quality or a particular function of that energy, which is phohatic energy in that caduceus, right?
Robert, you're free to speak. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting here, very symbolic, when it says that the tomb was discovered when a donkey disappeared into the wind. I mean, it's very, very symbolic. And then down below, when the Gnostic spirits, one of them is the ass.
Exactly. Yeah, I got that when you said the first. And then one wonders, did he fall through in the sign of Cancer? You know.
Yeah, right. And so symbolic of humanity, of course. You know, I'm really struck by the stuff that we've been reading. How HPB was really always walking that razor's edge between not revealing too much of the secret knowledge and at the same time carrying out her mission, which was to undercut fundamentalist religion. And it made me think about that what we were talking about before, that the fall of man, which is predominantly Christian, Orthodox Christian doctrine, and how much shade she throws on that idea and confusion. Obviously, as we read the Secret Doctrine, we don't read sentences and then we understand it. What we get is mystery upon mystery that we then have to ponder. But anyway.
Yeah, one of the big differences is between HPB's purpose and DK's was she was in the business of relating the existing forms with the secret doctrine. So, you know, she gave these she gave us these extraordinary stanzas and verses, but then related their meaning in accordance with existing teachings and doctrines. DK was more or less free of that. And I think in some ways HPB paved the way for DK to be able to just speak the pure wisdom, you know. So yeah, they had real different purposes in that way. And a big part of hers had to do with making it clear what the Christians and Jews got right and what they didn't get right, since Jews and Christians made up such a big part of her audience at that time.
And since DK was also writing through her much of the time.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah.
It's almost like it's kind of a three, you know, like the three solar systems. You got the first one, Blavatsky, you have Alice Bailey, and maybe one of these days, if we merit it, we'll see the third.
Yeah, and then the third is yet to come.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Martha, would you read that for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Joe. There are three chief groups of builders and as many of the planetary spirits in the Lapika, each group being again divided into 7 subgroups. It is impossible, even in such a large work as this, to enter into a minute examination of even the 3 principal groups, as it would demand an extra volume. The builders are the representatives of the first mind-born entities, therefore of the primeval Rishi Prajapati, also of the 7 great gods of Egypt, of which Osiris is the chief, of the 7 Amshavspens of the Zoroastrians, with Ormazd as their head, or the 7 spirits of the face, the 7 Sephiroth separated from the first triad, etc., etc. Shall I read the star?
Yes, would you?
Yes. The Jews, save the Kabbalists, having no names for east, west, south, and north, expressed the idea by words signifying before, behind, right, and left, and very often confounded the terms exoterically, thus making the blinds in the Bible more confused and difficult to interpret. Add to this the fact that out of the 47 translators of King James first of England's Bible, King James I of England's Bible, only 3 understood Hebrew. And of these two died before the Psalms were translated. The Royal Masonic Encyclopedia says this. And one may easily understand what reliance can be placed on the English version of the Bible. In this work, the Douay Roman Catholic version is generally followed.
Yeah, it's said elsewhere that of all the Bibles, that's, I hesitate because the Bibles are not esoteric, but that is the best representation that came forward. That's generally believed. Okay, any thoughts, questions? Yes.
That's what we grew up. It lasted all the way into the 20th century. And then the biblical scholars, people like Raymond Brown and so on, began to deconstruct the Bible in a way that the Catholic Church actually allowed. They were careful how they put it.
Yeah.
But that they too had to recognize and appreciate the change in the flavors, the various flavors in the languages. So
yeah. And so there may very well have been a more illumined interpretations, translations since HPB's time when the Douay was generally followed. So yeah, it's a good point.
Francis Efrosini puts in the chat box, and about the dragons, there are Gorgon's heads.
Up, and in what way above the dragons? What does that mean?
Maybe in a previous slide? I'm not sure.
Yes, I think they're referring to an image that where Carrie was commenting on Taliesin. Both Anne Veronica and Efrosini made comments about the dragons.
Yeah, Gorgon is a little different. You could say it's a subset of the dragon world. They're in the Buddhists. They're the wrathful beings who tend to be guards. It's that first ray in its potentially destructive aspect, usually acting as guards. And Gorgons are often used in that way.
Yeah, they were both referring to the previous slide.
Yeah, okay, well, I can just show this one. Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, I got you now. Right, and this would, very popular at that time was Medusa's shield. And even though we don't see the snakes, it would be the same idea, that it's a protective mechanism that literally drives back evil and danger. So you could say that that's the purpose or an aspect of the serpents shown below. Interesting to see these little caduceuses here too. Shows the dual nature of the snake, and also the the esoteric science of Kundalini in this. It's a really cool tomb, because you have the Egyptian in the background. There's Anubis taking the heart out of the deceased and about to go into the Memtat, where he will present it to Osiris. And then you have this other tradition, which is more Gnostic here in the foreground. Really cool.
And Veronica, do you want to comment a little bit on your thought? And then I'll read the next comment from Samuel.
Actually, Frosini said about the on top of the dragons. I said about the caduceus that are on top of the dragons, which we just talked about. So it's Frosini that actually should talk about other things, she said.
Okay. Yes, Frosini.
And then Samuel adds about Mount Meru. Maybe physical height has always been important in religious settings for the solemnity and peace of mind it offers. It's said Jesus did go to a mountain too. I also think it would have been a natural progression for the spiritual generation of different cultures to look to mountains in order to escape the prying eyes of the profane. But also we have the mountain of Moses and Tibet, a place mostly revered because of its mountains.
Indeed. Now, good observations, all of those. There is a different quality in the mountains in terms of the lack of Maya that allows contact with the higher vibration. I've experienced it myself many, many times. And because I live in a mountainous region, and when I walk in the mountains, I notice a difference in that way. But it's also, as you say, it is an effective allegory, the idea of height, for the spirit realms. So yeah, thanks for your observations. Anyone else?
I don't see any right now.
Okay. So first up, there are three chief groups of builders and as many of the planetary spirits and the Lepika, each group being again divided into 7 subgroups. Let's take a look at the Theosophical Glossary for more insight on this. This is specifically about the builders. Can we get a reader?
Robert, would you be able to read that for us, please?
Sure. The Cosmocrators, builders. The word is especially used in reference to 3 principal groups corresponding to similar groups of Dhyan Chohans and Lepikas. The first group rebuilds worlds after Pralaya. The second builds our planetary chain. And the third are the progenitors of humanity. Collectively, they are the formative logos, grouped under various names among different people such as Osiris, Brahma Prajapati, Elohim, Adam Kadmon, and Ormuzd. Again, the Aces of Scandinavia, the rulers of the world which preceded ours, whose name means literally the pillars of the world it supports, are thus identical with the Greek Cosmocratores, the 7 workmen or rectors of Pymander, the 7 rishis and pitris of India, the 7 Chaldean gods and 7 evil spirits, the 7 Kabbalistic Sephiroth synthesized by the upper triad, and even the 7 planetary spirits of the Christian mystics. Following the plan of divine ideation, they fashioned systems out of primordial material called ether, ilus, protyle, etc. Cosmocrators, as the masons of the world, work in the vehicular or matter side of nature and receive the impress for their work from the hierarchy that works in the spirit side, the Dhyani Buddhas or architects. Another aspect of Cosmocrators relate to the genie or rectors of the 7 sacred planets and stand as the world builders of the Earth planetary chain.
Thank you, Robert.
I never saw myself saying Cosmocrators, however you pronounce that, 4 times in a very short time. But
Indeed.
We have a comment from Efrosini. I'm sorry.
Yes, Efrosini.
Yes. She says, with the appearance of Fohat before the worlds were created, the great lords of karma, the Lupikas, were born. Isn't that weird? To have the recorder of the violation before the birth of the offender.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. Generally, the Lepika came first, or I should say, precede the actual builders, because they bring forth the plan by which the material world will take shape. And that is determined in the link to karma, is because that the form aspect is always determined by karma, right? So you have the very quality of the form, of the molecular structure of the form on whatever plane is determined by karma. And we'll get into this a little more, but that's why they work hand in hand with the actual builders, and very much with, you could say, their agents, that Fohat, which is always the third aspect, are agents the Lipikas in this way.
Samuel has a comment. Samuel, go ahead.
Yes, it's just a question. So I have been wondering over the name Dhyani Chohans and the Dhyani Buddhas. So I was I thought at first that the two, that the Dhyani Chohans were is more like a group name, and then the Dhyani Buddhas are maybe the individual way to call them, or what do you guys think? I'm not sure.
Well, Chohan tends to be a name that refers to superior monastic development. That's, in other words, all-knowing. Chohanic is a level of development along the, you could say, along the hard ray line. They would have Atmic consciousness. Buddhic being the other line, the soft ray line, of course, because the Buddhic plane being the fourth plane. And so for that reason, the Chohanic would be more outward, or hang on a sec, I have to close the door. Okay, so it would be oriented towards the occult purpose of delivering the message, and the Dhyani Buddhis would be in a more primordial relationship to the Chohans. And that's not definitive, but that's my memory of what we could actually look in we won't take the time, but we could look in this great Dowson's cyclopedia of terms and get a clear understanding. But that's what I remember.
And Veronica has something to add. Go ahead, and Veronica.
Hello.
Yes.
The word cosmokratores is a Greek word, means somebody, one who holds in his hand the cosmos.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's always oriented towards that cosmos that he holds in his hand.
And actually, no, I haven't said it. Well, no, not one who holds, the one who resides over the world. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. Maybe if Rossini might correct me. It's somebody that has that reigns. Am I saying it the right word? It is a king of the world, of the cosmos.
Yeah, you're saying that right.
And it's got a double meaning, and he holds the cosmos in his hand. He has a grip of the cosmos.
Okay, thank you for that.
That means a very high being, I guess.
It's but it's a group, and it's not a singular. It's not a king.
No, it's not a singular.
And in theosophy or in the ancient wisdom teachings, it's connected with, well, we're going to be reading what it's connected with, right? Well, we just did. And it has very much to do with the form aspect. So they hold in their hands, you could say, instead of hold, you could say mold with their hands the material aspect of the words, right? They rebuild worlds. That's the form aspect. And there's, the three groups. Each of the three groups are oriented towards the building of the material aspect. For instance, here it says, well, see, I think I actually, one of the more important points is that they collectively are the formative logos that, quote, follow the plan of divine ideation. That's the Lipikas. Thus fashion systems out of primordial material called ether, elus, protyle, etc. So, that's their esoteric meaning. Now, I'm sure that in the Greek hierarchy of understanding that this is known to be the case. But, since I don't speak Greek, I can't speak to that. But
Efrosini put in the chat box, the ruler of the world, name of God.
yeah, I don't think that's accurate if you think in terms of pure deity, pure spirit point of view. In other words, it's not the first aspect or first principle, theosophically speaking. It's that group that form the third aspect. And in that sense, they're sort of king of the form world, right? But they're not the gods themselves, you could
She
say.
corrected her statement and said the name of Satan.
What? Name of Satan is what?
Yeah, she said that the meaning is it's like the ruler of the lower world, the name of Satan.
Yeah,
Is
see,
that
there you have this duality, which is, what is the lower world? Well, in Christian iconography, it's hell, right? And that's how you get Satan and the whole idea of evil. But from a theosophical point of view, this is the lower world, that the physical world, which the cosmocratories build, is the lower world. The form world is the lower world, and that's where Samael rules. But under the surface of that rulership is great knowledge, because it's all part of the plan as set forth by the Lapika. A lot of it's in recognizing the true meaning of these terms. Right? And finally, they work in the matter side of nature. That's the key here. And receive the impress of their work from the hierarchy that works in the spirit side, the Dhyani Buddhas or architects. You see the duality there? They carry out the work of the Dhyani Buddhas or architects. And that itself is informed by the Lapikas. Okay. And that concept is mirrored in HPB's next statement. The builders are the representatives of the first mind-born entities, therefore of the primeval Rishi Rajapati. So the key word there is representatives, the outer representatives of the inner beings of the primeval Rishi Prajapati. That's the 7 in 1, the 7 great gods, etc. In fact, that's the next thing. Any thoughts or questions about this? Not easy, to get a final, clear understanding of this hierarchy of beings, because it's not just top to bottom. It's also there's aspects within that hierarchical system, right? We spent more than one webinar considering these primordial 7, that's described here in the bold, introduced all the way back in stanza 3, verse 7, which states, 4 take to itself 3, and the union produces the sapta, in whom are the 7. So the sapta are the primeval Prajapatis, in whom are the 7 builders. I like this stanza because it separates the two. It says, and the union produces the sapta, in whom are the 7, right? So you have it's exactly like what she just said here. You have the builders are the representatives of the mind-born sons. The 7 are the representative of the sapta, right? Which are at a more primordial level. Okay. Here HPB describes these primordial 7 as they appear in Hindu, Egyptian, Zoroastrian, and Christian doctrine. Like I said before, her purpose is to tie together all the various doctrines so that we get a sense of their universal meaning, right? MPH gives us further insight into each of these groups just described in the May 1937 edition of his monthly newsletter. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Greg, would you read that for us, please?
Yeah, sure. In the Northern Tibetan system, the meditations of Adi Buddha, universal consciousness, produces the 7 Dhyani Buddhas, or the 7 modes of consciousness by which the world is formed. In the teachings of the Persians, the supreme nature, Ahura Mazda, manifested the Amesha Spentas, who become the formators of the lower worlds. In the Egyptian Hermetic teachings, the Elohim are the governors, the cosmocratores. In the ancient Egyptian system, they were the Ammonian artificers, the servants of Ptah, who fashions the egg of the universe upon a potter's wheel. The Elohim are also the 7 Kabiri of Samothrace, the 7 rays upon the golden crown of the Gnostic lion, the sacred 7, the unwritten vowels, which together make up the name of the manifested divinity, the 7 colors of the spectrum, the 7 days of creation, the 7 seals of revelation, the eternally recurring septenary by which art, music, and physics are bound together are the Elohim, the 7 breaths that move upon the deep.
Thank you. So in theosophical thought, what are these 7 modes of consciousness by which the world is formed? What's one name for these 7 streams? Anybody?
Rossini says the 7 rays
There you
of
go.
consciousness.
That's it. That's it. So from one point of view, you could say that these builders are the way by which unity breaks out into diversity, right? And it does so as 7 and then as subsets of 7. So you have the 7 and the 49, etc. And then, so what MPH has done here is given us all these different versions of the exact same thing. Of course, with cultural differences and there's going to be different emphases, but at the root of it is this unity manifesting as 7. So you have it here, right? Manifesting the 7 that's described here. 7 rays upon the golden crown of the Gnostic lion, right? Okay, hope this is coming clear. Not easy stuff. Okay, so I think...
Excuse me, Francis, Robert has his hand raised.
Yeah.
First of all, that PRS drawing of the institute that they were going to build, which ended up being different, but that's an amazingly interesting thing to see. I don't know how many people have been to that organization in Los Angeles, but that's a great thing to have.
Yeah, yeah. Little trivia there. Yeah, I've been there. It's an astonishing building. He was endowed. Manly P. Hall was endowed. He had a early donor who helped him eventually build the PRS, Psychical Research Society, Philosophical Research Society, I should say. Yeah. Anything else, Robert?
Yes, I wanted to say that when you pointed out that the kind of organization that we're dealing with here, sort of the organization of the cosmos, which is clearly very, very well planned out and designed. And yet, because of all these links in the chain, you can see that a link could break every now and then, or something which would have to be repaired. So in the Great Invocation, the let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Obviously, the plan, that chain got, it lost the link. Is it your understanding that was in Atlantis at the time of the battle between the forces of light and darkness?
That the link was broken?
Yes, yeah, that's one we're dealing with.
You could say that the fact of the need to develop mind is a temporary breaking of the link. In other words, the unconscious link with the sacred is broken. That's humanity being driven from the Garden of Eden. That's where they're, as is shown in that wonderful William Blake painting, if they're just one with their source, right? But through development of mind, and you can, if you think about it, you can see why that would be true, that lower mind is separative. It requires a false identity for it to be developed. And so there's this cycle in the first 4 to 5 sub-races of the fifth race where that development takes place before higher mind is eventually developed in this fifth sub-race that we're in now, and the next sub-race, especially the sixth, where reunion is eventually regained. And that's always preceded by initiates who do it early, right? And then become the teachers of humankind. And that is exactly what they teach, that what you're talking about, the plan that needs to be restored. And you could say that the new group of world servers are the agency for that restoration. And all you have to do to join that group is to make soul contact, and you're in, right? Anything you do from that decentralized point of view of soul contact, all the work you do in the world then becomes the work of the new group of world servers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else upon this? I love this. It's, MPH can be so clear and yet so thorough. And this is, I think, a really good example of that. He just lists all the different ways in which this system has come forth, right? Okay.
Samuel has his hand raised.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Samuel. You may be muted.
Samuel, can you unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So on the consciousness is something that I've been thinking on too. So I was thinking that the individual consciousness that we humans are born into might be is it different from the rays where we talk about the first ray up to the seventh ray. So yeah, what I was thinking, I could be wrong, but that the rays are, instead of consciousness, or maybe synonymous with consciousness, it could also be individual, a type of individuals that fall into these different rays. And then on the other hand, the consciousness aspect is very closely related to the chakras, which you eventually go through until you get to the seventh.
Right. Okay. Yeah. First of all, the rays determine the certain energies that stream through first your soul, then your three sheaths, which once you have gained an integrated personality, become the ray of the personality. And so that's very determinative of how you, as an incarnated singularity, experience your environment. So if you have a second ray soul, you'll have a very different experience of reality than those with the first ray soul, for instance. So that's to answer the first part of your question. The gradual evolution of consciousness takes place through those seven streams, but is its own process, right? And that involves it's demonstrated, or you could say mirrored, in the chakras, but it's not the chakras that make it happen. The consciousness comes first through soul contact and eventually through soul at one-ment. And the result is seen in the effect on the chakras as they come into greater energetic activity. Okay, anyone else? Thanks for that, Robert. I'm seeing here this term, the first unit. So he knew that it was a precursor to what would end up being there. All right, let's go ahead. I think we know that in terms of any kind of esoteric accuracy, the Bible is deeply flawed, though it has its moments, such as the verses from Ezekiel 1 that we read last month and just quoted. At any rate, no need to analyze the details of its imperfections for us. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Carrie, would you read that for us, please?
They build, or rather rebuild, every system after the night. The second group of the builders is the architect of our planetary chain exclusively, and the third, the progenitor of our humanity, the microcosmic prototype of the microcosm. The planetary spirits are the informing spirits of the stars in general, and of the planets especially. They rule the destinies of men who are all born under one or other of their constellations. The second and third groups pertaining to other systems have the same functions, and all rule various departments in nature. In the Hindu exoteric pantheon, they are the guardian deities who preside over the 8 points of the compass, the 4 cardinal and the 4 intermediate points, and are called Lokapalas, supporters or guardians of the world in our visible cosmos, of which Indra, east, Yama, south, Varuna, west, and Kuvera, north, are the chief. Their elephants and their spouses pertaining, of course, to fancy and afterthought, though all of them have an occult significance.
Thank you, Carrie. Any thoughts or questions spring to mind? Okay, first up, they build, or rather rebuild, every system after the night. This is the first and highest group of the 3 groups of builders, which in our system relate to the 7 planetary logi, which are also chakras in the solar logos. In other words, they're the means by which the logos manifest. The night is, of course, the systemic pralaya, not the universal pralaya, but our systemic pralaya. Then the second group of the builders is the architect of our planetary chain exclusively. To get a better understanding of these 2 groups of cosmocratores, or builders, let's take a look at 3 short excerpts from the Secret Doctrine dialogues. So here we are. Each of these columns is a different excerpt. Could we get a reader, please?
Karen, would you read those for us, please?
There seems to be great confusion and misunderstanding concerning the first and second logos. The first is the already present, yet still unmanifested potentiality in the bosom of Father-Mother. The second is the abstract collectivity of creators called demiurgi by the Greeks, or the builders of the universe. The third logos is the ultimate differentiation of the second and the individualization of cosmic forces, of which Fohat is the chief. For Fohat is the synthesis of the 7 creative rays, or Daihan Chohans, which proceed from the third logos. Question: is form the result of the interaction of the centrifugal and centripetal forces in matter and nature? Answer: every form, we are told, is built in accordance with the model traced for it in the eternity and reflected in the divine mind. There are hierarchies of builders of form and series of forms and degrees from the highest to the lowest. While the former are shaped under the guidance of the builders, the gods cosmocotores, the latter are fashioned by the elementals or nature spirits. Can you say what is the real meaning of the word Fohat? Fohat is related to Mahat. It is the reflection of the universal mind, the synthesis of the seven, and the intelligence of the seven creative builders, or as we call them, cosmocotores. Hence, as you will understand, life and electricity are one in our philosophy. They say life is electricity. And if so, then the one light is the essence and root of all the electric and magnetic phenomenon on this manifested plane.
Thank you, Karen. Thoughts about this? Questions?
I don't have right now a thought about this, but I'm still thinking about the sixth toe in the picture by Blake. And one of the things, since you just mentioned, or we just discussed this breaking the link, and having to do with mind. I'm just wondering if this is very concrete, has to do with the sixth root race, that sixth toe being related to the sixth root race.
It could well be. It could be an allegory for someone who lives, who has mastered that level of consciousness, right? Which is, the fifth race, I should say the fifth kingdom, right?
Well, or even like the restoration of the plan, when most of the human kingdom has, evolved to that level. Exactly.
And we have in that great being represented, someone who has achieved that. The other thought that came to me as you were speaking is that the six are always the manifestation of the seventh, which is the synthetic principle, right? Outwardly, you have the six-pointed star and then the point in the center. And so you could have the foot as the synthetic organ of the six toes, again, purely metaphorical. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. But let's get back to Fohat.
Well, before you go back to Fohat, Vivian said, did you notice that God has his big toe over the foot of Adam?
Oh, in that.
Yes.
Okay, you guys, I could see this is really interesting to you also. Way back here. Okay, let me see first of all where we are, so I don't get lost forever.
And then following that, we do have a question about the actual page we're on.
Okay, yeah, I think it's 127, 28. Okay, so here we are. Okay, yeah. Yeah, he's covering his toes with his big toe. Yeah, that's really interesting. To me, it just means an allegory for the link with humanity. All beings go through the human kingdom. This being who is no longer human, though he appears here in human form, pass through the human kingdom at some point. All, planets, solar systems, all these great ones pass through the human kingdom. So there's that. He could be showing the link with that. Yeah. Was there something else connected with this?
No, there's a question from Rossini about the slide you were on about Fohat. Why is she talking about three groups of builders while previously she was talking about four high rulers or Maharaja?
Okay, the three groups of builders, and we'll be looking at that. In fact, I address it in just a minute. So let me just put you on hold for just a second, okay? And I'll address that. I have to find myself. Okay, so of particular interest here, at least to me, is Fohat is the intelligences of the seven creative builders. So that that quality that is described as electrical, but of course it's the nature of that electricity on each plane of the subplane of the cosmic physical plane is quite different, and it is called intelligent electricity. And here we see that intelligent electricity is connected, or is the intelligence of these creative builders. You can see the inextricable connection between Fohat and these creative builders. Because, Fohat's primary function is to infuse spirit into form, which is the function of the creative builders. Okay. Next. And the third, the progenitor of our humanity, the macrocosmic prototype of the, wait a minute, sorry. I got to get back into play mode here. There we go. So, next, the third, the progenitor of our humanity, the macrocosmic prototype of the microcosm. So he's talking here about the three levels of builders, and specifically describes the third. This is in itself, just this third aspect, is a huge topic, which takes up most of volume 2 of the Secret Doctrine and much of the rest of this volume. Since HPB is here listing this in passing, I'll say only that this third group of builders is made up of two types: the lunar Petries, lunar because they create physical humanity, and the solar Petries, also called Agnishvatas, who fashion the inner man. Okay. So the question was the 4 and the 3. I think it was Efrosini asked about the 4 Dhyani Chohads, which are related to the 4 angles of the 4 directions, right? Which are the 4 angles in space, which we'll be talking about later. But you could say that their purpose is literally the opening of the realm of manifestation in its most homogeneous aspect, that they open the space by the metaphor of the 4 directions. And that the 3 levels of builders then would be the lower 3 that take it from that place into the form aspect. And that those 3, just to briefly recap, you have the first group, which are related to the, in our system, the 7 sacred planets and the 7 chakras of the solar logos, rebuild the system as a whole. The second group is related to the architects of our planetary plane exclusively, and the third is the progenitors of our humanity, and are thus the macrocosmic prototype, like the Manu, who are related to this group. The macrocosmic prototype of the microcosm, which is what we are as humanity, right? Okay. Next, planetary spirits. I hope that helps, Efrosini. The planetary spirits are the informing spirits of the stars in general, and the planets especially. So let's take a look at the Theosophical Glossary entry on Planetary Spirits. This is going to help a lot in terms of tying these concepts together. Could we get a long-winded reader, please?
Well, I don't know that she's long-winded, but I'll ask Yvonne. Yvonne, can you read that for us?
Sure.
I should say big-winded.
Okay, big mouth, huh? Planetary spirits. Every celestial body is under the directing influence of a hierarchy of beings, spiritual, quasi-spiritual, and astral, the higher of which may be called celestial spirits. The term planetary spirits is usually restricted to the highest class of these beings pertaining to planets, although the phrase is also used in other senses. These planetary spirits have evolved through past cosmic cycles of evolution from a state equivalent to the human, and the general hierarchy pertaining to each planet is closely linked with the destinies of the present various life waves of that planet. We ourselves are destined in the future to become planetary spirits of a planetary chain that will be a later embodiment of our present Earth chain. This Earth, being only in its fourth round, has not yet produced high planetary spirits, but it will have begun to do so at the end of the seventh round. At the summit of the hierarchy of planetary spirits is a supreme hierarch. Planetary spirits parallel the Buddhist Dhyani Chohans or Dhyanis, with the exception that the Buddhist phrase has far larger application as it includes not merely planetary spirits, but likewise spiritual beings of various grades in a solar system. The higher planetaries are those presiding over an entire chain of globes, and their influence extends over all the 7, 10, or 12 globes of a chain. There are also planetaries belonging to the same general planetary hierarchy who preside over a single globe of a chain. And again, lower planetaries, such as those in more or less immediate touch with mankind. There are planetaries of high spiritual status and planetaries of far lower status, who at times even may be spoken of as dark planetaries. Thus it is that the work of the higher planetaries is beautiful, compassionate, and indeed sublime, whereas the lowest or dark planetaries are frequently the agents of matter, as contrasted with spirit. What the Christians, following the Greeks, called angels, are planetary spirits of high type, while the Christian archangels correspond roughly with the highest subclasses of the planetaries. In Hindu thought, the Manus are planetary spirits of various hierarchical grades in a planetary chain. The Prajapatis, also in certain cases, are identical with the Manus, the latter having a special connection with the human life wave.
Thank you. Well done. Any thoughts or questions about this passage? So you can see the profound interconnection between all these groups, subgroups of beings.
We have a hand.
Sometimes being exactly the same being, but described from a different perspective, right? Yeah, who was just speaking?
We have a hand up. Samuel. Go ahead, Samuel. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. The question that I have is this passage directly from the Secret Doctrine?
Oh, no, that's a good question. Down here, you see these letters OTG. That's from the online Theosophical Glossary.
Oh, okay.
Originally, there was a published Theosophical Glossary, which is a marvelous reference book put out by De Perucker, and then another one that HPB put out herself, a kind of glossary. This is a greatly expanded version of that, and it's an absolute treasure of a resource. online, you just simply, if you just wrote online theosophical glossary in your search field, you would be directed immediately to
Okay.
that.
Thank
So,
you.
just great. Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. Okay, any other thoughts or questions about this? So next, they rule the destinies of men who are all born under one or other of their constellations. And we're talking about the planetary spirits now. So this has a twofold meaning. Obviously, if you're born on a planet, your destiny is under the supervision of the hierarchy of planetary spirits concerned with that planet. The second meaning refers to the astrological influence of a star or planet on a person, group, or even a nature or a nation, right? Subgroups of all types. Next, the second and third groups pertaining to other systems have the same functions and all rule various departments in nature. So each planet has its own hierarchy of builders, obviously. They have versions of the second and third for each planet. On our planet, an example of this type would be the great beings that rule over each kingdom in nature, with lesser lords ruling over each species, etc. There are also Deva lords associated with each continent and each country, which could be called planetary spirits, with each race, with each subrace, etc. After stating that the Lokapalas are the guardian deities who preside over the 8 points of the compass, Dowson's Dictionary of Hindu Mythology lists the names of each of these 8, including alternative deities, plus the names of their elephants who, quote, take part in the defense and protection of each direction, a metaphor for the active potencies of the Lokapalas, plus the names of their wives. And don't worry, we're not going to read this list, but just take a second and on your own, just grab anywhere in this and read a line or two to get a feel for the content of this and of what the Lokapalas are. Okay, thoughts, questions about anything in this segment? Next, we turn to our last paragraph of commentary on verse 5. So could we get a reader including the footnote?
Greg, would you read that for us, please?
Okay, the Lipika, a description of whom is given in the commentary on stanza 4, number 6, are the spirits of the universe, whereas the builders are only our own planetary deities. The former belong to the most occult portion of cosmogenesis, I guess,
Yeah,
which cannot be given here. Whether the adepts, even the highest, know this angelic order in the completeness of its triple degrees, or only the lower one connected with the records of our world, is something which the writer is unprepared to say, and she would incline rather to the latter supposition. Of its highest grade, one thing only is taught. The Lipika are connected with karma, being its direct recorders. And that is the symbol for sacred and secret knowledge was universally in antiquity a tree, by which a scripture or a record was also meant. Hence the word Lipika, the writers or scribes, the dragons, symbols of wisdom, who guard the trees of knowledge, the golden apple tree of the Hesperides, the luxuriant trees, and the vegetation of Mount Meru, guarded by a serpent. Juno giving to Jupiter on her marriage with him a tree, I got it just a second. Okay, there. A tree with golden fruit is another form of Eve offering Adam the apple from the tree of knowledge.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this before we get into it? I'd like to take this entire paragraph, which contrasts the Lapika and the builders as a piece. First, as to whether any adept knows the angelic order in the completeness of its triple degrees remains, of course, an open question. But I think HPB would have been astonished at what has become available on this subject through a treatise on cosmic fire less than 30 years after the publication of the Secret Doctrine. As an example, next time we're going to take a look at this excerpt, which reveals details of the hierarchical order of the Lapikas, details presumably unavailable or too secret to give out in HPB's time. A lot changed between 1888 and 1925. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you all so much. Do we have dates for next time? Do you have that at your fingertips? Either Joe or Lynn?
I do not. Lynn, do you have that at your fingertips?
Okay, I think it follows the first and third Sundays.
Yes, it does. And I'd have to access my calendar, and I don't know how to do that. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. I can do it. Let's see what we got here.
Don't tell BL we failed in our duties.
You guys are so in trouble. Okay, so we are now on October 17th, and if we move to
Be the 21st.
Okay, so November, it's the 7th is the first. That would be the next.
The Manly P. Hall, yes.
Manly, yeah, the Secret Teaching of All Ages. And then, yeah, as you say, the 21st will be the next Secret Doctrine series. And I believe that's correct. I don't think there's any exception. Usually it's just the first and third Sundays.
Time change.
Time
change. Time change.
The time change. Oh, thanks for bringing that up. When does that happen? Does that happen before the 7th?
The 7th. So, well, it actually happens.
Oh, there it is. Says it right there. Daylight savings time. So, yeah, all I can do is say, pay attention to the time on that date and set your time accordingly. It'll be, you will get a notice, so you'll know what time GMT that it's happening on. So I'll just leave it at that instead of trying to, figure out all cases for each of you. Just,
Right. It's important to note for Europe that the time changes on October 31st, so it will affect them too for the 7th.
Right. I think it affects everybody because it's usually done in the at 2 a.m. in the morning, which means that it will affect this day of November 7th. The time chain will come into effect.
Francis, I thought we had discussed this last time, and we agreed that we would stick with 7 p.m. GMT.
But see, depending on your daylight savings time, that's going to shift,
Sure.
as to when that actually occurs locally. That's just a heads up to, reconcile the time that appears on your invitation with your local time. And I think that's it. Anybody else? I don't want to end with this thing on. There we go. So any last thoughts or questions?
There was a question, someone asked, would you repeat the meaning of night in the one slide?
Oh, sure. That's an easy one, so I'll address it. If you were asking, what is the Lapika, Lord? It would take longer. But the meaning of night is simply that time of inactivity, which is called in occult parlance a pralaya, when all in systemic pralayas or nights, all is suspended, as it said, in situ. That is, your development is suspended and you are communing with the one absolute reality for that great period. It's, in that sense, it's like dreamless sleep, right? Re-nurturing you and preparing you for the next period of manifestation. Okay? All right then. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.